Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of Sunday Sit Down, the show where anything goes and nothing is left behind. As always, I am Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome, and I am very excited to be back so soon with another episode. And I hope that all of you in the BookTube community are excited because today it's all about you guys, because we're going to be talking about the genre that pretty much gave birth to the BookTube community, because that was the only thing that everyone and their mother and their cousin twice removed was talking about when BookTube officially took shape. And thanks to that little community and this specific genre, which of course is young adult fiction, I myself, coming out of grad school, finally got out of a massive reading slump and was finally able to put the school books aside and start reading some new awesome adventures in the world of books. But there has been a lot of interesting discussions that have come up in regards to YA. And the only way for me to tackle that is bring a prestigious booktuber into the conversation to join me. This is a booktuber who was one of the first people that I discovered in the community. She is also someone that I still cannot get over the fact that it took me so long to actually do a live stream with her, because we always talk, we have great conversations. When I made my video about my attitudes towards diversity and the bullying in the BookTube community, she was one of the first people to respond and even give her own perspective in a video, which was wonderful. And she is such a fantastic person. So I'd like to welcome her and her cats today. April from April Sarah, good morning. I'm so glad to have you on the show today.
Good morning. I'm really excited about these topics that we're going to talk about today.
All right, and we've got everybody in the comments. They're starting to flow. We've got Shayla here, we've got Charles here, and Chloe from Closey Cat, my fellow Funko Pop collector. So great to see her too. And I'm excited to see who else is going to be popping up in the community in just a couple of minutes. So anyway, let's get the questions started, because we've got a lot to cover in only 1 hour. So normally, I always like to start at the beginning. But today we're going to do it a little bit differently, because I feel that this question has to be asked first. And that question is, how do you define YA for our viewers? What is the best way to describe a YA book?
Yeah, this is always a really interesting concept, because when I first started reading, YA didn't exist. It wasn't a thing that was marketed at all. So trying to place what YA is, for me, it was always that range between fully adult and middle grade. And so it is those stories that are complex, but they're mostly about people who are just starting to grow up, people who are hitting the age where they don't really have a place in the children's world, but they don't have a place in the adult world. So it's that big end of the middle school and the beginning of the high school, and then a little bit of the start of the college. And sometimes it has to do with the age appropriateness of the topics that are covered as well.
So do you think that maybe it's like, this is the story that happens after the coming of age story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're now technically deemed an adult because they came of age, but they don't know enough, and they're still trying to find themselves in what that means.
Exactly, because even after you come of age and you finally reach that point in your life, there's still a lot of self-discovery that you have as a human being, because it's like you still have to get out there into the real world as an adult, and you have to understand how the world works. It's like you first come of age, you get exposed to the world, and now you've got to learn how to live in it.
Yep.
So that's another interesting thing that I'm thinking about. It's like, so Harry Potter, what exactly is that? Are there YA elements in there? Because to me, it starts off as a children's book, it goes into the coming of age, and then he actually becomes an adult. So maybe that could have been the birthplace of YA to a certain degree.
Well, I think I think Harry Potter helped the YA genre. I don't necessarily think it created it. Um, but there's something about growing up with a series
Right, right,
that starts at the young level and then builds up and it introduces you to the concept of growing up and discovering who you are. And I don't think those books should be classified in one section,
I
which is
agree.
why, which is why I really, really like the fact that there's so many different editions of Harry Potter and books like that, because it becomes approachable by different groups of people. Because I sometimes hate the fact that genres of age groups are created, because then it feels inaccessible for people who might benefit from it because they feel like they're too old or they're too young.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective. That's definitely very good. So then comes the next question, and that question will officially go back to your beginnings with YA, and that is, what was your first exposure to YA, and how did it change you as a reader?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, when I started to become a reader in that range of books we now consider YA, that grouping didn't exist. You had the children's section at Barnes and Noble, and then you had the older children's section that
Right.
was maybe two shelves that were like half height, and then you had to go into the fiction section where you had to dig through, was this something that I would relate to or not? And when I was at Barnes and Noble, maybe I was sometime in middle school. It's probably sixth grade, to be honest. I found this book called Legacy of Lies, and it's by Elizabeth Chandler, and it's part of her Dark Secret series. And it follows a character who has these powers, but she's in high school. And so she was dealing with all of the high school hormones and the drama and all that kind of stuff. And so that was my start of YA. And
Mm.
then that series just brought me into this reading area where I was learning more about what it meant to grow up and what it might look like to start being an adult and all of how to handle emotions in general. And so that was my introduction to the YA world.
Yeah, I think that, you see, I'm a little bit, as a reader, I was not one of those types of people that was going to the bookstores and scrounging for books. Like, I actually, most of my reading experience was word of mouth. And my first YA book series was Hunger Games. That was my first. And that was because my brother's wife, who was his fiance at the time, she was reading the books, and around that same time, I was starting to hear that they were starting to turn that book series into a film series. So, as someone who is a firm believer, as most of the time, don't judge a book by its movie, I wanted to read those books. And I mean, to me, I know that a lot of people classify it as a young adult series, but to me, sometimes it sort of feels that way, but at the same time, it sort of doesn't. And maybe that's just because of the science fiction elements in the story, but I know that it's YA, and I followed a lot of people who read other various YA novels and stuff like that, but that was my first exposure. And I liked it. And I also think that the reason why you could classify something as YA is the fact that it's a complex story, but at the same time, it's also a lot easier to read.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
just that's just my perspective on that.
Yeah. No, there's something about YA writing that it's not necessarily simple, but it's more accessible than some of the very dense adult books that you can find in the fiction section.
Yeah, because like a young kid who's like maybe 13, 14, or 15, they're not always going to want to go and pick up something like a Stephen King or an Isaac Asimov book. Maybe sometimes they will, because like I remember growing up, and my sister, who is 8 years younger than me, she had a friend who was on a much higher reading level, and like age 10, this girl read The Godfather. I was like, wow.
That's impressive.
Yeah, like I never even knew that a young kid would even be allowed to read a book like that. And even my own wife, you know, she's very smart, and the school actually gave her and one other kid in her class the opportunity to read books that were on a much higher reading level. So that's what I think. I also think that it's simple, but it's complex all at the same time. And for me, I feel that those are very appealing stories to the average reader. And it's not just in books, you see it in movies and television shows too. You know, like a show like Westworld is a show that is way too complex. A younger person might find that enjoyable, but at the same time will probably not, because they just won't get half the stuff. But if they watch something like Marvel's Daredevil, they'll get a lot more of it because it's just a little bit simpler to follow.
Right. Well, it's sometimes about emotional intelligence as well, because if you're not in a place to understand or grasp some of these more complex concepts, then adult can be very, very daunting, which is why YA is really good. But then you get some of these young kids who have a lot of emotional intelligence, and then YA it doesn't seem accessible to them because it seems very naive.
Right. Absolutely. I totally agree there. So the next question that I have for you is, when you discovered BookTube, did it help or hurt your attitude towards YA books?
Honestly, it hasn't really changed it much because I have always been a voracious reader and I've always been all over the spectrum with my reading. But it is YA is something that it's nice to go back to because I've been in that place, so I understand it. But it also is something that, oh, how do I put this? I have the ability to put myself into a bubble. So even though I am part of this community, sometimes it takes a lot for the opinions of this community to actually change my opinions. Does that make sense?
It does. And you know something, that's a great quality to have. You know, it's great because we're not seeing that in society that much these days, especially for those wonderful people out there that are politically minded. You know, it's like there's no reason why you cannot exist with people who just don't think like you. It's not impossible,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I feel that when I first got exposed to BookTube, I was very positive about it because I was like looking for something to read, you know, because it had been such a long time and there were all of these books and a good chunk of them were YA. And I just said to myself, I got to start reading these books. So for me, it was a real outlet to discover more interesting books, and at the same time, find more books that were in my niche that I really appreciated reading. Because when I was young, I was really not much of a reader. I really didn't find things that I truly liked. And I was really hopping all over the place. Like, I started reading some Michael Crichton books here and there. I read a Stephen King novel here and there. I read a John Grisham novel, but I was never really finding the books that I truly loved. When Harry Potter came along, that was my first exposure to a world that I was like, I actually like this. I'm actually enjoying this. And then I started reading like mad. I picked up the Lord of the Rings books, and then I started picking up a whole bunch of other books. But there were some other series that I was very interested in when I finally started reading books around the time that I connected with the BookTube community. I read the Stieg Larsson, you know, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. I was very interested in those, and it was a very good read up until the third book, which I absolutely despised. um, but I feel that at the beginning, it was definitely a healthy thing because it was just so exciting for me to get all of these books into my hands and start reading some new and exciting stories and exploring some new and exciting worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I feel right now it's a little bit of a mixed bag. And I think it has to do with the fact that, and this is not something that is uncommon, you see this in all areas of popular culture. When big heads of industry, like when they see something that just took off like a rocket, everybody wants in. So there were way too many young adult post-apocalyptic fantasy books out there. And I don't think that the message is getting through to these publishing companies. And the message is, please stop and give us something new. I mean, am I wrong? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Well, and I think it's part of the problem is they realize it's something that it works. People are buying these things. And when somebody finds a book that they truly enjoy, they try to find books that are like it, which is why they start selling really well. And that's why we get this oversaturation of certain kinds of books in the genre. And I don't want to just put it on the publishers. It's bookstores as well, because
Right.
they need to stock books that sell, and so they know this is going to sell, and they don't always look for the book that might be the next big thing, because it is hard to sell the next big thing until it's the next big thing.
That's
Which
a good way
is
of looking at it.
Yeah, which is why I like this BookTube community so much, because while there might be an oversaturation of a certain kind of book at the bookstore or coming from the publishers, when you're talking to people one-on-one, when you're following what they're reading and what they're doing, you learn more about books than you do by browsing the shelf.
That is true. And that goes with any form of entertainment. Word of mouth and people talking about things that they love really, I think, adds to the spark of interest to someone who's looking for something.
Right. And so I think the other books are there. It's just that they're not being marketed. And that's the problem. And so sometimes we have to step away from all of the marketing and all of the push for the next book that the publishers think is the next book, but going more of the not necessarily independent publishers, but the independent search for ourselves rather than just getting the overhyped.
Right, but at the same time, there's always that famous saying, if you want to learn to swim, you got to jump in the water. And I think that they all know that people are craving for something new and exciting, especially when you take a look at some of the more recent videos that are coming out in a lot of booktuber channels. I'm noticing a lot of people are looking far and wide and high and low for diverse reads. They're looking for a lot of diverse contemporary fiction. I myself am not a fan of a story like that in book form. I find it a little bit more tolerable in movie form. I just feel like if I really want to read something about, if I really want to experience the real world, I'm going to walk outside and see it for myself. When it comes to movies or books, I'm someone who really likes to get immersed in something out there, something that we don't get in reality. That's just me. I respect everybody who wants to read contemporary fictions because that's your choice. You're allowed to read whatever the heck you want to read. And the fact that these people are looking for those new avenues to travel on, I feel that the companies and the bookstores, they're seeing that. But the real question is going to be, who's going to be the first one that makes the first jump? Like, who's going to be the person that says, okay, this thing is oversaturated, let's put this onto the shelves now?
Yeah, well, okay, so part of it's a really, really interesting dynamic that we're trying to dive into here, because we're talking about a community of people who read all of the time. So
Right.
we feel that oversaturation. We see all of the books that are just too similar and don't have that diversity because we're consuming all of the things that we can. Whereas the people who are selling these books and setting up these bookstores, they want to sell to as many people as possible, not this tiny little niche community. And so they know that the books that are going to sell are books that the general community will find palatable.
Right.
So
yeah.
So yes, we see this issue. We are the critics, unfortunately. So yeah, we have to be the push for all of that. But it's hard to get people who are in there for the money to see that this push is going to be for this small niche group of people. So it's maybe it's not necessarily getting the information out to the booksellers, to the publishers. It's getting other people part of the conversation. So the people out who are going to be purchasing these things, who are the access point, but not the small group of people that we have here. So it's me talking to, say, people at work or people in my family who aren't necessarily like huge readers, but getting them the knowledge that, hey, these other kinds of books are out here. And maybe we should push for more of these kind of books, and getting one of those books on the top sellers. And then everybody else realizing that these are the kind of books that people are going to connect to, but they don't know about them.
Right, exactly. And it's so funny because we actually have been talking a lot about the basis of what the next question was going to be. So I'm just going to ask the question in a different way just so we can continue this, because we're really going in a great direction here. And that was about the fact that I've been noticing, especially in the BookTube community, a lot more hate than love towards YA books. And we've already talked about some of the contributing factors, and that was oversaturation and recycled plots. We've covered that. But one of the few things that, this is for me personally, and I'm sure it affects a lot of other male booktubers, and I'm even going to go out on a limb and say this same thing that we said before we went on the air, straight male readers. There's a lot of lack of representation when it comes to male appeal, especially when it comes to YA. And before we went on the air, I said to April that two of the most interesting and most popular YA books, and one's a regular book and one's a book series, a standalone book and a book series, that was the Maze Runner trilogy from James Dashner and Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. These were two young adult books that were made at the time when the major focal point of the main character was a female. And a lot of people were drawn to those books because they were like, oh, wow, there's a male guy, there's a guy in this book. I haven't read an YA book with a guy in it. But do you feel that that's a contributing factor as well to the fact that we're seeing a lot of people that are trying to look for something new in the world of YA?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a YA. Okay, so when thinking about who reads YA and who starts reading YA, it's from the census of the community that we have here, it is females. It is females who are looking for that social growing up and all that kind of thing. And I think part of it is because there isn't a lot for other people to read. And it's hard for me to talk about it because me, straight, white, female, there is a ton of stuff out there for me. So diversity is a topic that is hard for me to comment on in general, because I can pick up literally anything behind me and I can relate to it.
Well,
but,
yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were going to get continuing.
Yeah, no, and so part of it is trying to find that diversity for diversity's sake, and then there's diversity for people to connect with.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. As a matter of fact, Joanna from Joe the Great, who discussed identity politics with me in my last episode of Sunday Sit Downs, we covered this area. We did. And I'm so glad that you brought that up. I really am glad.
Yeah, because I mean, I love diversity. It irks me when it becomes a marketing point.
Or tokenism to a certain degree, where
Yes.
they just have a rainbow of various orientations and skin colors for the sake of having them there and not developing them.
Right. And I think that ends up hurting the whole diversity talk in the first place, because you start to get all of these cliches and all of this mess of things that people are who don't understand are like, oh, it's diverse, it's wonderful, it's awesome, when in reality it's just continuing a narrative that isn't helpful.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing that those what everybody refers to them as the extreme progressive left. It's not classic liberals, it's not centrists, it's not even libertarians or true authentic Democrats. It's this small subgroup that is just trying to push this. I refer to it as a false narrative, because I mentioned the CW shows on television, like The Flash and Green Arrow and Riverdale. There's a great deal of diversity on those shows, but there's no tokenism. Like a perfect example is Kevin from Riverdale. He's gay, but he's not skipping around like saying, "Hey, love me, I'm gay." No, it's a gay character just being a human being. And that's where everyone, whether you're gay, straight, black, or white, you'll relate to that person because it's being a representation of a human. And that's what I feel that they're lacking when it comes to this forced diversity. They're not humanizing them.
Right. No, and that's exactly it. It's don't throw something there just to say, hey, I've got it there. Put it there so that I can say, oh my gosh, I understand this person. This person is human to me. I mean,
Exactly.
and that's the whole point of all of this storytelling, is to create a sense of connectedness.
Exactly. Yeah. Also, somebody mentioned Supergirl, Grace's coloring corner. Joe is right. I was referring to all the DC shows, because Greg Berlanti, who does happen to be a gay guy, he is really writing these characters and this diversity into his stories on television very well. But at the same time, it's also because of the fact that it's a television series, and because of the fact that you have so much to work with via a season, you have that opportunity to create those great characters. And you can do that in books, especially if it's an ongoing series. I mean, like Steinman versus the Homo sapiens agenda, that's turned into a universe at this point in time. Becky Arbatali has made various stories within that universe, and the fact that she has done that, she has gotten her opportunity to create human beings out of these various orientated characters, which is, again, a massive plus. A massive plus.
Right. And the thing about adding all of this diversity and everything like that is you have to understand it. You have to understand it to write about it, to create it. If it's coming from some place of not understanding, people feel that. And it's not necessarily something that we want right now.
Right, exactly. And I think that one of the most powerful YouTube videos that came out last year was the male booktuber tag, where it was a tag that was created specifically geared to finding, first of all, to find the male booktubers on YouTube, because they do exist. You just have to find them. But at the same time, what was amazing was I was loving all the answers that were being created, because male readers, whether they're straight guys or gay guys, like, we do feel that we would like to be represented more. We'd like to bring our own perspective to the community. It's also one of the main reasons why when I hear about a lot of books that are being reviewed, mostly by the women in BookTube, I'm always asking them, would a guy like this book? Because, look, guys and girls are different. We all have different tastes. We do have similarities too, but there is going to be something that a guy is going to love that a girl is going to hate, and vice versa. It's just human nature. That's what it is.
Yeah, we relate on different levels, and there are some guys who understand the female mind more than they do the male mind, and that's completely acceptable. And so they are usually the ones who feel more comfortable talking about books or being part of this BookTube community, which is sad because my brothers and my dad and a lot of males I know, they love reading, but for whatever reason, they don't necessarily talk about reading.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I feel that BookTube has reached a very new plateau. I am also loving the fact that there's a lot more reviews of comic books and graphic novels. And the comic book industry, which was extremely male dominated, I mean, any male booktuber that watches this live show, this is an opportunity for you to pounce. You don't need to read the things that are new and exciting. You can go to a comic book store and you can pick up a paperback copy of some of the greatest comic book stories of all time. For me personally, I would love to review Batman The Dark Knight Returns. I would love to review Watchmen. I would love to pull off the shelf the entire Infinity War now that the movie has made so much money in the box office. I'd love to give my perspective of the original comic book storyline. There's so many opportunities now for the male booktubers to shine right now. And believe me, people will watch. And it's also great because when people see a male booktuber, I notice that so many members of the BookTube community flock to that channel because I think that they know they're going to be getting a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So we're reaching the half-hour mark, and I just want to say to everybody, I'm loving the conversation in the comments. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And as always, just know that all of April's information will be in the description box, and this video will be taken down about an hour after this officially closes out, and I'm going to put a nice little intro and outro on it, and I will be reposting it on my channel on July 9th, which is Monday tomorrow at around 7 a.m. So with that, let's continue on with the conversation, and I'm really excited to hear your answer on this, and that is, what is your attitude about YA becoming a Hollywood cash cow? Do you feel that all of these books should be adapted to film, or do you feel that some of these should just be left alone?
Okay, so I'm going to struggle to answer this question unbiasedly because a majority of my reading is retellings. And so I love living in the retelling world. And so a lot of times I view the conversion of a book to a movie as a retelling. It's someone reinterpreting a story. So I absolutely love the fact that the movie industry is willing to take these stories and make them movies. And it's something that has been happening forever, since the dawn of movies in general. There's a book somewhere that people really love and they relate to. So let's try and tell it in a different format, a different storytelling. And so I am perfectly okay with the industry trying any and every book. However,
oh, I knew there was going to be a however or a but.
However, there are times where it's not done well.
Right, absolutely.
And that's when I start to get a little unexcited about it. I mean, but it's true about books that do retellings as well. You have to weed through a ton of, I don't know, like any fairy tale retelling, Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid, all of that, because those are very, very popular retellings, to find a decent one. So, I mean, I can see where people can get disenfranchised with movies taking over YA books. But at the same time, you have to get it out there so that people know what is good and what is bad.
Right, absolutely. And For me personally, I feel that some of the YA books that have already become films, I feel that some of them actually did better than their original counterparts, because a YA book that I despise is Mockingjay. I hate it so much. It is such a poorly written book, and it really disappointed me because Suzanne Collins did such a great job with the first two books in that series. The problem was it was such a different way of telling the story, and for me, it was more visual. When the movies came out, because remember, it was split in two. Why that happened, I don't know. But I feel that Mockingjay as a film was better because you got to see everything and everything made more sense. The same could be said about the last two books in the Maze Runner story, because they were extremely fast paced and extremely confusing, and so much was changed for cinematic value. I actually found the Scorch Trials and the Death Cure to be better films than the books. I really liked the films. But there are some YA books that me personally, I am craving to see on the big screen. I know that the movie rights for the Lunar Chronicles are somewhere. They're keeping it way under wraps, and goddamn, I think it's going to work. But you want my attitude? I think that the Lunar Chronicles would do so much better if it was animated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's almost the way I've always like visualized it, and I think it comes back to, you know, the original inspiration for the whole series, and I think that's why I think an animated version of the Lunar Chronicles would be amazing. But I mean, it comes down to the fact that different kinds of people watch movies and different kinds of people read books. And if we limit what movies can be made from books, sometimes there's a really good message in a book that we can get to other people through movies.
Oh, goodness. Shayla just said something fantastic. She goes, yes, Stephen, animated in the style of Your Name. Yes, Your Name. What a movie. I love that movie to death. Yeah, what do you say?
I'll have to check that one out. I don't think I've
Oh
seen it.
yes, Your Name is a phenomenal anime. I think it's one of the greatest anime films, possibly one of the greatest films ever made. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But yeah, I would love to see the Lunar Chronicles done in anime style, because especially when you read Cinder, that book screams anime.
Yep, like I said, you can tell where the original inspiration came from for that series.
Yeah, and another book series that I know that the movie rights are somewhere is the Mistborn trilogy from Brandon Sanderson. And
Oh,
I just read those books earlier this year, and one of the few things that I have to applaud Brandon Sanderson for is how beautifully he writes action sequences. They are so fast paced, yet they're so detailed. Like, you can actually follow it, and it's unbelievable. I wish that more authors could write like him. And I got the opportunity to meet him at BookCon, and I just said to him, I still can't get over the fact how you pulled it off. It was a miracle of literature. And I said, even though you did such a great job, I still would love to see these action sequences on the big screen, especially the third book, when in the beginning when Vin does her Iron Man thing. I was like, oh God, please show me that on the big screen.
yeah, no, that series would be amazing to see visually. I mean, I almost put it into the realm of seeing the Lord of the Rings actually made live action.
And Lord of the Rings was, and I don't know about you, but I think that the Lord of the Rings films are better than the books. I mean,
Yeah.
the books are classic, but my goodness, Peter Jackson gave me, I think, the three greatest films of all time in terms of film making.
Mhm.
Not in terms of plot, not in terms of character, but film making, the lighting, the cinematography,
Yep.
the visual effects, which were still trying to be something truly great, because there were still so many kinks to work out when it came to CGI. But he did it so well.
No, that's exactly it. It's the visual nature of that movie is what I really, really connected with, because I read the books, but it wasn't until I started seeing some of these action sequence play out in front of me that I'm like, oh my gosh, I relate to this. I really like seeing this. And yeah, it didn't necessarily stay true to the story. I have a whole other issue with the Hobbit trilogy that they decided to do,
Yeah.
but it's still nice to see it in that format. It almost expands upon the universe.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and the Return of the King, the movie made me and so many people like I'll throw out the typical line from the BookTube community. I got all the feels from that ending, and I was so glad that Peter Jackson changed the ending because I hate the way Return of the King ends in the books. I hate that ending so much, and the extended editions are unreal.
Yeah.
Unreal. And I will say this. I think that the extended editions of The Hobbit, I think it actually gives that trilogy a little bit of justice. Because, to be fair, one of the few things that I was very happy about with The Hobbit was that they actually put some of the songs into the movie. Because you had to.
Yeah, that is very true. That is one thing I did like about The Hobbit is where they brought that part of the storytelling in.
Yeah, like I love the scene. My favorite scene in The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, is when Boffer gets up on the table, Riverdale, he goes like, like, and he just starts like, I can watch that scene any day of the week. It is so fantastic. And I also think I have to give a little bit more credit to Peter Jackson in regards to the Hobbit films was the fact that he actually did do his very best to make those stories, which are so much more lighthearted, on par with how dramatic and heavy-hitting Lord of the Rings was. So you got to give him a little bit of credit for that.
Very, very true. I think it just comes from a place where I grew up reading the books, but I also grew up seeing it in theaters.
Right. Right.
So I knew there was a movie-like version of it already, and it was already in my brain. And then it just got expanded into 3 movies, and I'm like, what is this? And literally the only way you can do that is by adding more to the story.
Well, I'm telling you, you see the extended editions, there's so much more justice in terms of giving us a great rendition because my wife and I, we went to see The Desolation of Smaug, and when the dwarves meet Beorn, she's like, why are they not coming in 2 by 2? Like, they literally cut that all out. You get that in the extended edition.
Okay.
So it's like those moments that you wanted, but I will still say, and I will fight to the death in regard to this, I'm so glad that Tom Bombadil is not in the movies.
Yeah. It would have been interesting to see what they had done with him, but
Well, I'm telling you the truth. Like, I read those books before there were movies, and I remember reading The Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm reading Tom Bombadil, and I'm like acting like Jeff Bridges in The Big Lebowski. I'm like, what the fuck is with this guy? Who is he? Like, I didn't understand his place. You know?
yeah.
But anyway, yeah. And another book series that's extremely popular is Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. HBO. There's so many rumors they're trying to turn that into a TV series, and I think that would work because that's another thing. It's also trying to figure out how to make it like, does it work as a film or does it work as a TV series? Like for me, Game of Thrones as this TV series, stroke a genius, stroke a genius. Because I will never pick up those books. Those books are beasts, but I love the show. I really, really do. Same thing with Outlander. I think Outlander as a TV series works better.
Right. I mean, and it all depends on like how complex the whole reason for the story. So when you have something that is very character driven and is based on a lot of things that happen to these characters and the development of these characters, TV shows make perfect sense. But if you're telling like a big overarching action story that you have a clear beginning, middle, and end, movies make total sense.
Right. So now I know that we touched a little bit on this, but I think that there's a lot more that we can discuss, and we still have a good 15 minutes left, which is wonderful. So let's talk a little bit more about your attitude towards a lot of the controversial elements that have been plaguing the YA books, and you see it predominantly in the BookTube community, especially in recent years. That's not just diversity, which we've already tackled to a certain degree, but there's also the concept of the trigger warnings and the politics towards or against world leaders and threats towards authors because of the lack or the too much wrong thereof. In regards to authors and booktubers for assumptions and ignorance. I mean, that's a loaded question, I'm sure, but you see where I'm going there, because it's like I feel that we're getting a lot of finger pointing, and we're not getting any reasoning as to why.
Yeah, no, that's like a huge loaded question right there. So starting at the top, I have no issues with trigger warnings and things like that. And I understand why people sometimes feel the need to tell other people about them, because I mean, it's just like the rating system on movies. Like, because it has this rating, you know, it'll probably contain these things. And so it's just a pre-warning for people who might have issues. Yes, sometimes I feel that it can be overdone, because at some point you probably just give away the whole plot. But at the same time, I don't think it is right to come after someone for not warning you about a trigger warning.
I agree, but honestly, I also have a lot of disrespect for the trigger warning, because I feel that the trigger warning or the spoiler alert, whatever you want to call it, I feel that it has been blown way out of proportion. Basically, we've gotten to the point where a whole freaking book is one massive trigger warning.
Right. Well, and some of that is, you should be able to tell that from the summary for yourself. And so you don't need to tell me necessarily that this is a trigger warning, because by the synopsis that I know this is going to be about this situation or something like this. That should be kind of intuitive. But I do also understand that people do have a lot of mental health issues that they have to be very, very leery of, because they can put themselves into very, very dark places if they aren't pre-warned about them. But at the same time, it isn't necessarily the responsibility of someone who is reviewing to be thinking about everybody else's mental health.
Agree, and I'm glad you brought the concept of mental health up, because I wanted to make sure that that was not taken out of context when I started talking about it, because, you know, I know that mental health is a major discussion point right now amongst all of us, especially amongst the youth. And I feel that as a tax-paying citizen, I feel that that's one of the few things that our tax dollars should be going to. Two things that I think need to be where my money needs to go, because I feel that mental health research needs to be worked on more, but also along with things like prison reform and cancer research, so many things. But I believe that we are not doing enough for mental health in terms of medicine, because there's such a lack of understanding. But at the same time, I don't think that a person's mental health should be a crippling force. You know that famous saying that if you fear something, you got to do something that scares you in order for yourself to conquer your fears? And believe me, I am scared to fucking death of pigeons, but I will walk next to them these days if I see them on the streets. But I can't deal with those little fuckers. I hate them. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we now officially have a society where people are literally in bubble wrap. And that's not the way that I grew up. My parents literally threw me to the wolves. And they said, you got to get a thick skin, you got to man up, you got to know when to report, and you also got to know when to hit back. That's just the way that I was raised. I don't think that it's the people who have these issues. I don't think that they're at fault. But I feel that it's a massive misunderstanding right now, which is why we are in this state when it comes to these topics of discussion.
Well, and I feel like people understand their own triggers. And so I think they're a better guard for their own triggers than somebody else's, which I think is where that disconnect is coming from. It's all of us trying to be too understanding, Because the second we become too understanding is when we start blocking these stories from a general audience.
Well, that's something I don't agree with. They shouldn't be doing that.
Right, and which is the whole point for these stories, is so that we start to understand these people who have gone through these very traumatic events,
Absolutely.
who are dealing with all of these issues, which is why I like to read those kind of things, because then I understand these people on a deeper level. But it's a weird place to try and understand, because yeah, we don't want to overly protect people, but at the same time we don't want to traumatize people.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, here's a perfect example, and this is a very tough topic to discuss. One of the things that can truly traumatize someone is when someone is sexually assaulted or raped.
Mhm.
I happen to know someone who is married to a wonderful woman who was unfortunately raped, and she chose to keep her child. But she didn't let that make her cower into a corner and not live life. Like, she's a very independent woman, and she is stronger than she's ever been. And I feel that while it is very hard to overcome something that will truly hurt you mentally, I still feel that with the right people around you, and the people that are not coddling you, people who are caring but also want to see you break out of your shell and live, you know?
Yeah, that's part of the reason though. Like, I feel like somebody who's dealing with this will understand all of those better than I am.
Yeah, same here.
So me trying to overly cover all of the things in some kind of storytelling that could trigger this, that, and the other person ends up only hurting whatever I'm trying to do. But I mean, that also leads into the fact that in this community, we've started attacking people for various reasons.
Yeah, I'm very much against. Well, actually, for me, it's they're attacking people, but they have no reason, or
Yeah,
their reason is wrong, because you can literally ask them the question, "Why do you feel this way?" and they can't bring a reason as to why.
right. Yeah, I mean, and it just that mindset. Ooh, excuse me. That mindset of I need to be on the defensive and I need to like push you because I feel like I'm in the right for whatever reason. If it's an author or if it's a YouTuber who put out a review that you just don't like for whatever reason, I'm coming from a mindset where I think you always catch more flies with honey rather than vinegar.
Bravo.
So I like to have the intellectual discussions on why something isn't working. So if it's flat out bullying, it's not going to accomplish anything. It literally
Right.
it'll accomplish nothing, and in fact, it will probably turn people off
Right.
more than anything. And
Because one
so
of my yeah.
yeah, so then whatever agenda you had doesn't work.
Right, because one of my personal experiences is I have no interest in reading you give. I'm just not interested in reading the book. But I did see the trailer for the film, and the film looks very good. And I feel that I will appreciate the story more in film form than I will in book form, especially as someone who has been watching movies that are very much oriented around the stories about attitude towards various races. Like, I've recently watched Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I've recently watched In the Heat of the Night. Later on this year, I'm going to be reviewing one of my all-time favorite films, which is called School Ties. But it goes back to my attitude about the bullying. It's like, I don't like the fact that people will gang up on someone just because they don't want to read a book. You don't have to read every book. You don't have to read a mainstream favorite amongst people. You read the books that you want to read. You're the author who writes the books you want to write, regardless of what the subject nature of the book is. That's why we live in a country that's free. We have the ability to do whatever we want to do as long as it is within the boundaries of law and order. And I feel that just because somebody doesn't agree or someone just doesn't like what you're doing, go read something else. How hard is that to do?
Yeah, no, I mean, even to the opposite end of that, it's people getting attacked for reading a book.
Exactly. All those people that got knocked for reading Carve the Mark. I mean, come on.
Right. I mean, and there's something to be gained from anything you read, whether it's good or bad. I mean, the fact that you recognize that there's something wrong with a book made it important enough to read so that you can have that conversation. It doesn't make sense to have a discussion, to start bashing and bullying people about something that you yourself haven't experienced. And you're
Exactly.
going off the word of somebody else.
Yeah, because the only way that people are truly going to appreciate where this person is coming from is if they explain their story. Because, you know, I think that I think that these people who are literally doing the bullying, I think that they have this little mentality in their mind. It's like, you will never know what a person is thinking unless you walked a mile in their shoes. That way you'll be a mile away from them and you'll have their shoes. You know, I think that that's their mentality. They feel that if they're open and honest and they share things, they feel that it's still not going to get their point across. Well, you know something? Shame on you for not being the open and honest person that you are. And Joanna also made a very valid point. It's also because of the fact that you can be anonymous on social media that it is so much easier for people to bring the wrath of 1,000 suns on somebody that they disagree with. Well, you want to know something? It's failing. And a perfect example, I'll just throw out some politics right now. There's something going on right now called #WalkAway, where people from the Democratic Party are now making video testimonials all over social media that the people and the belief system that they believed in is no longer what they believe in, and they don't want to be a part of it. And if these certain small groups of people keep doing the bullying, keep doing the attacks without reason, they're going to keep losing and they're going to never win what they really, and they're never going to succeed. That's a problem. I want everybody to be happy and I want everybody to succeed. They just have to learn to live with other people and other opinions. That's all.
Exactly. I mean, I'm not saying to accept everybody's opinions. I'm not saying to agree with everybody's opinions.
Allow them to have it exist. That's what it is.
Have it there, have a conversation with the person about it, gauge whether or not they're even worth trying to change or not, but don't force them to change.
Exactly. Because I'm loving that I'm throwing out all these quotes. I say this all the time. I would rather be hated for who I am than be loved for who I'm not. And I stand by that. So we're getting into the last 3 minutes. So here's the last question. I think that this is going to be an easy one to answer. Do you feel that YA can still be a driving force after hopefully this storm lets up? And how do you think it can?
I think YA is always and forever going to be a force in the reading community because it is the first point of access of a real life-changing story. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things going on in middle grade, but YA is when the hormones hit, where all of the crazy emotions hit. It's where all of this finding yourself really starts to happen. And so I feel like this is the access point. This is the access point for people becoming real readers. It is the access point for people finding who they are. And so this will be a driving force. It will always be a driving force. Whether or not it continues to be called YA or not, that's a completely different conversation. But it's I believe always and forever because
Yeah.
that's the age where we change the most. So
Exactly. I agree with you. I feel that in the past couple of years, thanks to things like BookTube and thanks to things like Goodreads, I feel that the industries have learned a great deal, and I feel they sort of know what's in the cards. I think they know where they want their future of this genre to go. I mean, I'm glad to see that the sparkly vampire stories have officially gone away, and I'm thankful for that. Very thankful for that. Now we just need to get some really great vampire stories back into the world of YA, and I think that we can do that. But Yes, I believe that it is an access point for people who really want to become great readers. And I agree. I think that YA has shaped the readings for the better. And I feel that it will continue to shape the reading community. And it's just great to know that people are still reading books at this point in time and will continue to read. But anyway, everybody, that ends the show for today. April, I just want to say thank you once again for joining me. What a great conversation. I had too much fun, and I'm so happy to see all the comments that happened today in the chat room. So everybody, just know that this video will be taken down and it'll come back on Monday at 7 a.m., which is tomorrow. All of April's social media will be posted in the description box. April, I'm hoping that we can do more live shows. We had a great conversation before we went live about physical and digital media. Can we make that happen?
I really, really hope we can, because it was an interesting conversation.
Yes. And everybody, don't touch that dial. Actually, touch that dial to a certain degree. Go to April's channel, because she's going to be having a live stream on her channel. She has one every Sunday, and she'll be doing this one as soon as she is able to set everything up. Am I correct?
Correct.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to the next Sunday sit down, where we bring another great topic to discuss, but more importantly, another wonderful YouTuber to discuss it with. I'll see you all in the next one.
Bye.
Hey, thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. If you're new here and want to see more of what my channel has to offer, please click on the link to my last video, or hit that subscribe button to be kept up to date with all of my uploads. Content of all sorts is posted here quite often, so trust me, you do not want to fall behind. I will see you in the comments, and actions speak louder than words.